the first organized vegan movement was anarchist. It was the Vegetarians. Les Vegetariens were early 20th century anarchists who decided that to be completely independent of masters, you needed to reduce all the things you were using so your body wasn't polluted and you didn't need as much stuff. And the word végétalien already existed in French. It roughly speaking means vegetabilian, but they took it to mean no tea, no coffee, no chocolate, a very frugal diet, quite so, with erring towards raw, and as part of a communal anarchist philosophy. I mean, there was even a drive-by armed robbery gang in the early 20th century France. One of the first armed gangs to use getaway cars was actually vegetarian and anarchist, and raising money, I think, for their anarchist political projects by robbing banks.
I'm all on board, except the chocolate and tea.
Yeah, I think, and alcohol. So
they were straight edged.
They're basically, yes. These are anarchist straight edge vegans in early 20th century France. And they set up communes, and they had a chain of restaurants and their own salad called La Basquinaise. That they thought would be a complete meal, and they had a couple of other interesting dietary beliefs, but they petered out with their founders. But it was a really interesting little movement that at its time managed to keep outposts going all around France. But if you asked anybody in the early 20th century who the most famous vegetarian was, they'd say Count Leo Tolstoy, who had a dramatic conversion to vegetarianism after visiting a slaughterhouse, and settled his own. But his motivation was deeply religious. Mm-hmm. He had a massive crisis of faith and came out of it deeply touched by the Gospels, by the Christian Gospels, but very much an anarchist version of them, in which Jesus was simply a fantastic teacher. And it seems he came to a very stripped-down liberal theology with a very radical message about giving up your wealth and sharing it and working in communes and asceticism, and kind of fell out with his wife quite badly over it, but particularly the giving away all his wealth. But there were Tolstoyan communities all around the world. Gandhi called his ashram in South Africa Tolstoy Farm. He owed a lot of his views to Tolstoy. And actually, I think there was a Tolstoyan congregation in Croydon, in South London, that set up a vegetarian society. And that vegetarian society was still around in 1944. And one of the pivotal events that played a pivotal role in the launch of a proper vegan movement that wasn't attached to any other philosophies, was kind of a meeting ground for vegans of all persuasions. And because that society was still around 50 years later and hosted a debate between the vegans and the non-vegans, and that was probably the first time that the vegans who were yet to be called vegans actually came together and actually met each other, because that was quite a well-attended and written-up debate, and there were people who were there who then, a few months later, went to set up the Vegan Society. So without anarchism. Without anarchism, who knows if we'd have had a vegan society in 1944.
From 1909 to 1912, there was a lively discussion in the pages of the Vegetarian Society's journal about the idea of whether or not one should eat dairy products.
As long as we drink milk, eat butter and cheese, or use leather, we are taking part in the slaughter, and when the cows are old or too badly diseased to be further milked, they become the butchers. Cannot have eggs without also having on your hands a number of male birds which you must kill.
Writing from India, there's Nasi Ram from the
Animals Friend Society, Punjab.
He defends Hindu farmers, saying there's milk for calves and humans to share.
When a mother cow is domesticated and caressed by supplying her with all the necessaries of life, as if she were a very member of the family, the usual quantity of the cow's milk is much increased.
Dr. Florence Sexton, one of Scotland's first women physicians and a trained dairy farmer, suggests cows have a comfortable existence, and unlike Ram, she defends killing the male calves.
Newly born babies, whether human or animal, have no consciousness, and it cannot therefore be cruel to destroy them.
Some familiar names take part in this debate. Anna Bonus, the niece of famous 19th century feminist, mystic, anti-vivisection vegetarian physician Dr. Anna Bonus Kingsford, speaks up for cows.
It must involve some slaughter, I think, and some suffering to the cows and calves.
So does the simple lifer from last show, Dougald Semple, who is already experimenting with veganism.
Eggs were meant to produce chickens and not omelettes, and cow's milk is a perfect food for a calf, but most assuredly not for a human being.
The editor, Alfred Cornelius Newcomb, is more concerned about hygiene than animals.
Eggs and milk, when carefully selected, are pure foods. They have not been through the wear and tear of life and, therefore, do not contain the broken down tissues, the refuse of the body, which is so objectionable a component of every piece of flesh which a meat-eater swallows.
But a Mr. Hunter of Stirling looks to the future.
Personally, I use very little of these animal products. I'm only on the way. In a few generations, we may succeed in living on a purer and more humane diet.
The dairy discussion recurs in the magazine again in the mid-30s and again in the early 40s, and that time it gathers momentum. In 1944, a handful of non-dairy vegetarians get organised.
Donald Watson is probably the most well-known. He was the person who edited the magazine for the first 2 years.
This is Donald Watson, interviewed in 2002 at the age of 92 by the then Vegan Society chair, George Roger.
A year or two before the society was formed, I was corresponding with a very small number of people scattered far and wide.
Who are these people in terms of social class and background?
Reasonably well-educated people, but not people of great wealth or position in society. There's certainly no one who's titled, for example, as a patron or anything like that. In fact, if anything, I suppose people like Donald Watson were anti-establishment. He was a conscientious objector, which would have been pretty unusual at the time.
In April, at the Croydon Vegetarian Society, South London, Donald Watson proposes a motion against dairy products, and only 2 or 3 people disagree. This debate probably brought together a lot of like-minded people, and it was organised and chaired by one Elsie Shrigley.
Elsie Shrigley taught piano at one point. Later on she marries a dentist and she helps in his surgery.
Elsie will stay on the organising committee until she dies in 1978. Donald's seconder, Faye, is a 40-something widow from a vegetarian family who manages the Attic Club. 7 weeks later, she marries a fellow activist, Alan Henderson.
Mr. Henderson would later go on to be the first employee of the society. He was a sort of a paid secretary.
The goal is to organise a section within the Vegetarian Society and its newsletter.
The Vegetarian Society refused them space in their journal, and had that request been accepted, they would have been a subgroup within the Vegetarian Society.
So one Sunday in November, the 5th, says Elsie, core activists gather in Faye Henderson's Attic Club.
I think there probably is a sense that the war is coming to its close and that the end of the war is not that far away. So I suppose there must be the beginnings of a mood of optimism, I think.
But what to call themselves?
I did appeal to my readers to suggest what the name might be, and I had a list of very bizarre suggestions.
The suggestion from the Hendersons was that the society might be called All Vega, and the magazine All Vegan, and from that Donald Watson created the name Vegan. And I think that came from probably the restaurant that was owned by Walter Fleiss and his wife in central London at the time, which was called Vega.
You might remember the Fleisses from last show as socialist refugees from Nazi Germany.
I settled for the word vegan, which was immediately accepted and over the years became part of our language.